Well, children, this is the last story, and it's about some very pretty things you can see in the night sky. It is called stars. Felicity and Leo Sutcliffe love going to school. Of course, they also liked being at home because Heatherfield Farm was a lovely place to be, but sometimes it could be a bit boring, especially if it was raining or too cold to go out. At school, they had plenty of things to do, and their teachers were always very kind and helpful. School was also a place where they had all their friends to play with and to talk about anything that was important to them. Felicity was very good at her lessons. She liked geography because it told her about all the countries in the world that she wanted to go and see. For the very same reason, she was now learning Spanish, because then she would be able to go to places like Spain, Mexico, Argentina, Peru, and Chile, where they all speak that language. Felicity was very good at drawing and looked forward to her art and design lessons, where she drew pictures of flowers, pretty dresses, and ladies with special hairstyles. Leo's interests were very different. He always wanted to know how things worked because one day he wanted to make them and fix them. So anything to do with science and computers had him concentrating very hard. "I'm going to be some sort of engineer," he had once said to his father. "Well, you'll probably need to be good at arithmetic as well," came the reply. As a result, Leo was really fantastic at adding up numbers, taking away, multiplying, and dividing them. You knew how clever he was because when he went into a shop with 50p to buy some sweets for 30p, he knew exactly what the shopkeeper should give him back, not just the sweets, but 20p as well. Leo was not very tall, but he was very strong and could run faster than anybody. That is why he liked sports, and his favourite one was rugby, even if it did mean he always got very muddy and sometimes came home with a few scrapes and bruises. Now, if you told any of the little people living in Heatherfield Farm's garden about Spanish, geography, computers and engineers, they wouldn't have understood a word you were saying. Their world was very different to the one that the Sutcliffes lived in. Indeed, the Sutcliffe world often seemed very strange and frightening to them. They didn't exactly understand what machines were, and when they came across them, they usually ran away. As they were no taller than a squirrel, they stayed well away from the lane outside Heatherfield Farm, avoiding all the huge and noisy monsters on four wheels that threatened to squash them. They even hated Jacob the gardener's lawnmower. Normally it was very quiet and asleep in the garage, but when Jacob brought it out and pulled its long piece of string to start it, it would suddenly growl into life, spout smoke, and start chasing around the garden, cutting everything in its path. Pickle and Pumpkin had once dared to get close to it in the garage, and were about to touch it when they panicked, thinking it was suddenly going to wake up and chase them. The Tiddlewits, Niffy-Bongs and Wahoos knew hardly anything about the world outside their garden in Heatherfield Farm, because nobody had explained it to them. They thought that aeroplanes were large noisy birds that had forgotten how to flap their wings, and they would never have believed that as many as 300 people were sitting down inside them. They also had some very strange ideas about all the things they saw each day. Mr. Tiddlewit could never understand why the sun always rose each day over Mr. Nicholson's farm, then crawled very slowly across the sky, and then dropped down to disappear in a distant forest when it got dark. What really puzzled him was how, the next day, it had somehow got back to Mr. Nicholson's farm. How had it crept back there without him seeing it? Then there was the problem of the moon. One night it would be bright and very round, and then the next night Mr. Tittlewit would see that something had been nibbling at it. This would keep going on until the moon had been totally nibbled away and disappeared. He began to wonder if there was some kind of invisible monster in the sky who liked eating the moon. If that was the case, he wondered if the moon was made of something rather tasty. But then the moon would start appearing again, as if the monster was spitting it out. Perhaps it wasn't so delicious after all. You might think it very strange that Heatherfield Farm's little people had never heard of televisions, computers, mobile phones, or MP3 players. They didn't even know about reading, writing, history, science, books, or newspapers, although it has to be said they were very good at counting things. They also knew a little bit about geography because they had listened in wonder when Swifty the Swallow had said how he flew for weeks over immense jungles, forests, dry deserts, big cities, and large seas. His listeners had begun to realize that the world stretched much further than the few fields and forests and thickets with which they were familiar. However, if you had told them the world was round, they would have thought you were very stupid. It was obviously flat wherever you went, otherwise everything, including people, would fall off it. Now, because the Heatherfield Farm's little people knew so little about the world of big people, you might think they were rather dull. Well, that could never be the case. Instead of televisions, they told each other stories, played games, did puzzles, sang songs, and had lots of walks and jolly picnics. They didn't need to read or write because if they wanted to know something, there was always someone who could give them an answer. Mobile phones weren't necessary since they all lived close to each other, and for the very same reason they didn't need cars, buses, bikes or trains. These wonderful little folk didn't even need money, because if they wanted something, they either made it or swapped things amongst themselves. Did the children ever go to school, you might ask? Well, they didn't go to a school like the one Felicity and Leo attended, but they did have some very useful lessons each day. Mrs. Tittlewit taught all the children how to cook and look after little babies like Bluebell. Mr. Tittlewit was a very good gardener and showed everyone when to sow seeds and how to look after plants. Seraphine and Mrs. Niffypong were very clever at making clothes, and even Mr. Niffypong showed them how to make clogs. Of course, he was a very good carpenter and was very good at teaching anyone how to design and assemble anything from a wheelbarrow to a table and chairs. Then there was Dr. Wahoo, who instructed everyone on which plants and flowers to collect so that they could make special ointments and medicines. He also told them everything about first aid, so that if anyone or any creature had an accident, they would know exactly what to do. Everyone helped each other and seemed to have the solution to any problem or need that arose in their little lives. On the whole, it meant that they were always very confident, contented, and happy people. But now and again, something would happen that confused them greatly. Once more, that something was about to happen, and we'll soon find out what it was. For Felicity and Leo, the school summer holiday had just begun. Soon the whole family would get into Steve's old car, together with Tolstoy and Polly, and drive a long way to spend 2 weeks in the wild and pretty Yorkshire Dales and North York Moors. This was the first time they had had a holiday in England for some years, because they normally went to France, where it was often warmer and sunnier, but they didn't like the idea of putting Tolstoy and Polly into kennels and leaving them alone. It would have been particularly unfair to Polly, who was still a very young dog. So they had decided to stay in England, because that way Polly and Tolstoy would be able to go with them. Leo had hoped to take his tortoise with him, but Sally didn't think that was a good idea, because it would have meant having to make a special enclosure for it. Instead, Jacob would be given instructions on how to look after the tortoise, making sure he had enough food and water and that he didn't dig his way out of his pen again. Felicity and Leo were looking forward to their holiday in Yorkshire, but it was still just over a week away, and they had already started to run out of interesting things to do. They were getting bored, and when that happens, children can sometimes be rather annoying to their parents, getting under their feet, looking miserable, seeing too much television, and lopping about on their beds doing nothing in particular. One day Sally had had enough of Felicity and Leo moping about and suggested they get their best friends to come and play. She would volunteer to go and pick them up in the car. Felicity thought it was a great idea and immediately phoned Naomi Chapman's house. Mrs. Chapman was only too pleased for her daughter Naomi to go and play, and wondered if Naomi's brother Charlie could come too, because both the Chapman children were also bored and looking for something to do. When Sally and Felicity went to fetch the Chapman children, they noticed that Naomi had packed a bag full of fancy clothes. "Oh, goody!" Felicity clapped her hands. "We're going to do dressing up." "Not me," Charlie insisted. Dressing up and pretending to be princesses were not the sort of things he thought boys should do. Instead, he had his football with him and hoped Leo would want to practice at scoring goals. As soon as they were back at Heatherfield Farm, the girls immediately got out of the car and ran up to Felicity's bedroom. As Charlie had feared, both girls found pretty clothes, muslin scarves, little headdresses, and dancing shoes to turn themselves into princesses. Felicity even got out the children's make-up box she had been given for her last birthday, and both girls used it to make themselves as lovely as possible, using lipstick, eyeshadow, nail polish, blusher, and even little sparkly things they could sprinkle on their cheeks. They took ages doing this, spending half their time looking in the mirror to see how wonderful they looked. Felicity went one step further, and without telling her mother, found Sally's jewel box. It had lots of necklaces, bangles, rings, hair combs, and bracelets in it. None of them really cost much money, but they were all very colourful and glittery, so both girls tried putting them on, eager to make themselves appear very rich and important. Felicity was especially pleased with a beautiful glass bracelet, with cut glass beads that looked exactly like diamonds. She put it on her wrist, holding it up to the light for all the colours of the rainbow to shine through it. Finally, when they went downstairs, they hoped Sally and the boys would notice them and think they were the most stunning creatures anybody had ever seen. Sadly for them, Sally was no longer there. She had gone to have a cup of coffee with her neighbour down the lane, and Leo and Charlie couldn't be found either. "Let's go down to the end of the garden and pretend we are in a fairy world amongst magical trees where elves and pixies live," Felicity suggested. "We can take biscuits and orange drinks and have a little picnic," she added, trying to make her idea even more appealing. Naomi thought it sounded like fun, although she was a bit nervous, wondering if there really were elves and pixies in the garden, and, if so, were they going to be friendly? Felicity got the biscuits and also cut 2 slices of cake she found in the kitchen cupboard. Then she filled 2 small plastic bottles with orange drink and put them in her school bag to take to their secret place in the garden. Both girls sang sweet little songs as they walked across the lawn, past the flower beds and vegetable plot, through the long grass and past the big pond, but for some reason fell silent when they came to the orchard. Walking silently together, they soon arrived at the old oak tree, but didn't stop there. They continued on their way through the little forest, where it became darker and darker, blotting out the sun. The rustle of leaves, snapping of twigs, and strange chatter of birds hidden high up amongst branches made everywhere seem oddly alive. Naomi began to feel anxious. She sensed 1,000 invisible eyes were watching her. Staying close to Felicity, she began to tread carefully, frequently looking around, fearful of anything that might be following her. In the gloom, the curled branches of trees hung down like sinister arms, ready to snatch her, whilst tangled weeds snagged and tripped her small dancing shoes. Naomi no longer thought of elves and pixies. Rather she imagined ugly witches, trolls, and wicked hobgoblins. "I don't really like it here," Naomi whispered to Felicity. "It doesn't feel like a friendly place to me." "Oh, don't worry," Felicity encouraged. "I've been here hundreds of times. What's there to be frightened of?" But no sooner than Felicity had said this, they both heard a low, growling sound coming from a short distance away. The girls immediately stopped walking, trying to make out what the sound was and where it was coming from. Then it started again, and was now much closer. In the undergrowth, more twigs were cracking, and there was a shuffling sound as something seemed to be tramping through dead leaves. Naomi froze, tightly clutching Felicity, now convinced something very horrible was stalking them. "Please, please, let's get out of here," she cried, but Felicity wasn't sure which direction to take in case they ran into whatever was threatening them. Then, suddenly, there was a loud and dreadful shrieking as two dark images, covered in leaves and long grass, jumped out from behind trees, waving their arms and leaping wildly from side to side. Horrified, Felicity dropped her school bag, grabbed Naomi by the hand, and started to run. Naomi tripped in her long dress, stumbled and fell to the ground, taking Felicity with her. Terrified and screaming, they both scrambled to their feet. Felicity lost one of her shoes, but was too afraid to stop and retrieve it. Both girls kept on running until they were past the big pond and through the orchard where, once more, they reached the light of a bright and sunny day. "Whatever it was, I think we've lost it," Felicity suggested, still nervous and checking to see if anything was lurking somewhere behind them. Naomi was not convinced. "I want to go home," she said, now sobbing inconsolably. Meanwhile, back in the forest, two naughty boys were rolling about on the floor, laughing so much they just couldn't stop. Covered in the camouflage of leaves and long grass that had made them look like monsters, Leo and Charlie thought they had played a really fantastic trick. When they eventually got back to the house, Sally guessed what they had done, and was very cross with them. "That was extremely unkind of you. Naomi was completely terrified and is still very upset. She was having a very happy time looking forward to a little picnic, and you boys ruined it entirely. You'll now say you're very sorry and that you won't be horrible again." Leo and Charlie could see how annoyed Sally was, and now they weren't laughing any more. They apologized in a very shamefaced way, but Felicity and Naomi completely ignored them. When she got home and was back in her bedroom, taking off all her fancy princess clothes, Felicity had a shock. Her mother's bracelet that she'd been wearing was no longer there. Felicity looked all around her bedroom, checking under the bed, her cupboard and bedside table. She couldn't find it anywhere. And then she realized it must have dropped off when she was running to escape the monsters in the forest. "Oh, never mind, Felicity. Don't worry about it," Sally excused, knowing that her daughter had already had enough upset for one day. "You can go and look for it tomorrow, and make sure Leo helps you, because he and Charlie are the reason why that bracelet is missing." Next day, Felicity and Leo searched for at least an hour, retracing their steps through the garden and down into the little forest. But no matter how hard they looked, the bracelet could not be found. Unknown to them, someone else had already seen and taken it. Seraphine always liked it when she was allowed to go to bed late, because then she could take a last look at the night sky and see one of her most favourite things. She was fascinated by the thick carpet of stars that covered the heavens, only she didn't know they were stars. She simply called them twinkles. When she was very young, she thought they were pinpricks in a large black blanket through which the sun still tried to shine. But then she changed her mind, because in winter time the sparkle of stars suggested a cold and crisp, frost-covered heaven. Since then she had thought of yet another explanation. Perhaps the twinkles were something different after all. Could it be that they were bright jewels scattered from a huge treasure chest? In her secret thoughts she longed to reach up, pluck twinkles, and string them into the most beautiful necklace you have ever seen. The day after Felicity and Naomi had had their big fright, Seraphine wandered into the forest almost exactly where they had been. She was carrying a little wicker basket on her arm and looking intently at the ground, especially wherever there were damp, mossy and grassy patches next to the base of trees. She was searching for mushrooms. She had been quite lucky, and when her basket was almost full, she started to make her way back to the old oak tree. Feeling very pleased with herself, she was humming a little tune when something caught her attention. She thought she had seen something glittering in the undergrowth, so she went over to inspect what it was. Putting down her basket and using her hands to part some long grass, she found Felicity's bracelet. Seraphine was thrilled. She had never seen anything like it before. Of course, she had bracelets made of tiny coloured stones, but because Seraphine was only a tiny person, these looked enormous. She wondered what they were, and then she realized. They were some of the twinkles she saw each night sparkling in the sky. Seraphine decided to take the bracelet home, but because it was quite large for her, she needed both hands, and so had to leave her basket of mushrooms behind. "Look what I found, Daddy!" she almost whooped when she saw Mr. Tittlewit working outside the old oak tree. "Twinkles, and lots of them!" Mr. Tittlewit was dumbfounded. "My, oh my!" he declared. "What a wondrous thing this is!" he marvelled, inspecting each of the large cut-glass stones. "And they look much larger than the twinkles we usually see at night. Maybe these are very special ones. I think we've got to take great care of them and keep them in a very secret place." Soon the whole family was outside. Mrs. Tittlewit gasped and wondered if it was right to touch something so beautiful after it had fallen out of the sky. "I think we'll put the twinkles in the spare bedroom and then spend a bit of time thinking what we should do about them," Mr. Tittlewit suggested, and everybody agreed. So the bracelet was gently picked up by Mr. Tittlewit, with Seraphine and the twins helping. It has to be said that although the Tittlewits were all very excited about having a string of large twinkles in their little house, Mr. Tittlewit had begun to express some concern. What if other things started falling out of the sky? It didn't matter if a few twinkles fell down to earth, but what if something as important as the sun decided to do the same thing? Of course, Leo and Felicity would have said this was a very silly idea because the sun was enormous and could never do that. In fact, the sun is 1,300,000 times as large as our earth. But Mr. Tittlewit didn't know this. He thought it was just a little round disk, probably no bigger than his hand, because it always seemed quite small whenever he looked up to shade his eyes from its brilliance. As a gardener, Mr. Tittlewit knew how important the sun was. When it shone, all the flowers loved it and grew stronger. They even stretched and turned to follow it as it moved across the sky each day. "Oh, dear me," Mr. Tittlewit suddenly muttered to himself. "If that sun decides to drop out of the sky, and fall somewhere else. It'll be dark all the time, and my flowers won't know what's happening. They won't grow any more, and the trees will die too." Mr. Tittlewit was horrified at the thought, and immediately rushed into the house where everyone was still in the spare bedroom looking at the twinkles. Except they weren't twinkles anymore. No longer as merry and excited as they had been 10 minutes before. All the Tittlewits felt something was very wrong. "They aren't sparkling any more," Seraphine stated, looking very sad. "I don't think the twinkles like it here." "Maybe they're missing all their family in the sky," Mrs. Tittlewit volunteered. "I mean, we don't sparkle very much when we're unhappy." Seraphine felt very sorry for her twinkles, and now wondered if she had done the right thing picking them up and bringing them home. "I think we need to get them back up into the sky," she said. "But how do we do that?" Pickle asked. "We can't reach that far." "Maybe if I climb the highest tree and put them on the top, that would help," Pumpkin suggested. "Well, if they got here on their own, and they're no longer happy here, they might find their way back," Mr. Tittlewit reasoned. "I think we should put them in the open tonight, so that they can look up and see all the other twinkles, and then they'll decide to go home." Everyone thought this was a good idea, and so that night they all helped to pick up the bracelet and take the bracelet outside. Carefully they positioned it in a prominent position on top of a very round bush, so that it could see all the other twinkles. "Oh, look, Daddy!" Seraphine gasped. "The twinkles are glittering again. They're happy to be outside, looking at all their relations in the sky." "I think we should go in now and leave things alone," Mr. Tittlewit ordered, shepherding his little family back under the old oak tree. "Let's not disturb any plans that those twinkles might be hatching. Let's just hope everything's back to normal tomorrow." After the nasty scare she had had and her disappointment at losing the bracelet, Felicity did not sleep well, and now woke very early in the morning. Her continued searches for the bracelet had all ended in failure. Still in her nightdress, she put on her slippers and decided to have one more go. Opening the door into the utility room, she was immediately greeted by Tolstoy and Polly, who, as ever, were delighted to see her, jumping up and wagging their tails furiously. "Come on, you two," she said, giving them both a hug. "I've got to try and find Mummy's bracelet. See if you can spot it." Outside in the garden, the early morning air was crisp, and damp dew covered the lawn. "Ooh!" Felicity shuddered. "Let's get a move on, because I'm already shivering." But then Felicity remembered she couldn't go too fast, because she had to look carefully around after each step she took. If she didn't, she would certainly miss the bracelet again. Felicity tried to remember the exact route she had taken when running from the forest to the house. But it was difficult, because she and Naomi had been in such a panic at the time that now she had forgotten. Skirting the big pond and passing through the orchard, Felicity had started to give up hope. "I'll never find it," she moaned as Polly and Tolstoy raced on ahead. Nearing the end of the orchard and now close to the old oak tree, Felicity suddenly heard both dogs barking. Of course, Tolstoy and Polly knew full well that their little friends the Tittlewits lived close by and had hoped to see them. Catching up with them, Felicity asked, "What's all the fuss about, you two?" Tolstoy and Polly were circling a round bush, barking and wagging their tails. They knew the Tittlewits had been there because they had picked up their scent and were very excited about it. "What's so interesting about this bush?" Felicity asked the dogs. But they simply kept barking and wagging their tails. Then Felicity noticed something. She saw a sparkle in the corner of her eye, and it came from the bush. Going over to see what it was, Felicity suddenly jumped for joy. "Oh, you clever dogs," she squealed. "You have found my bracelet." Tolstoy and Polly sensed they had done something rather good, but weren't sure what it was. So they simply jumped up at Felicity, making her nightdress rather muddy, and in return received strokes and hugs from a very grateful young girl. Now, very happy, but feeling quite cold, Felicity raced back to the house to tell everyone the good news. "What's all that barking?" Mr. Tiddlewood asked, rolling out of bed and making his way to the kitchen so that he could look out of the window. But by the time he got there, the dogs and Felicity had disappeared. Turning round, he bumped into Seraphine, who also wanted to look out of the window. "I wonder if anything has happened with the Twinkles," she murmured, and promptly went over to the front door. Stepping outside in her bare feet, she tiptoed on the damp grass towards the round bush. When she got there, she whooped with amazement. "They've gone!" she cried. "My Twinkles have gone home!" And then she ran back to tell everyone. All the Tiddlewits quickly filed out of the little house under the old oak tree to see what had happened. Mr. Tiddlewit immediately checked around the bush and under it to make sure the Twinkles really had gone, and then declared, "Well, let's hope their little adventure teaches them a lesson, that it's much better for them up there and not down here." Then everybody laughed. They were sad to see the Twinkles go, but very pleased that everything had now returned to normal. Felicity was also very relieved as she handed the bracelet back to her mother, who then commented, "I wonder how it got onto that bush. Has anybody else been in the garden?" This question now began to puzzle Felicity, because, to her knowledge, nobody else had been near the old oak tree for the last few days, and she didn't remember passing anywhere near the round bush when she and Naomi were making their escape. Then she remembered what Jacob the gardener had once told her in absolute secrecy. It was probable that little people lived nearby. Maybe they had found the bracelet and had put it there for Felicity to find. Very soon Felicity convinced herself that this was indeed the case. "How kind of them," she thought. "I must do something to thank them." Late that afternoon, when she thought nobody was about, Felicity once more made her way through the garden to where she had found the bracelet. There, next to the round bush, she deposited something rather special, and then crept silently away. Soon after evening had started to draw in, Seraphine came out of the old oak tree to look at the darkening sky. The sun was dipping behind forest trees, and a bright moon was already shining a luminous yellow. Glancing round, Seraphine took another look at the round bush, just to make sure the Twinkles had not returned. They had not, but she noticed something else there, and it was glowing. Worried that whatever it was had once more fallen from the sky, Seraphine rushed over to see what it was. Picking it up, she saw it was shaped with 5 points and had glitter stuck all over it. It was very pretty, and on the back she noticed something had been drawn on it. Looking at it closely in the fading light, she saw that it was a little heart. Seraphine gave out a little cry, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. "The Twinkles have sent me a little present and marked it with love," she declared, hardly believing the beautiful gift she had received. If she had known the truth, it was really Felicity who had delivered the star. It was a Christmas star that the Sutcliffes always put on the top of their Christmas tree, but Felicity thought that the little people would enjoy it far more. Clutching her Christmas star, Seraphine sat down on the grass next to the round bush, and then settled to peer up at the night sky. Gradually, as it became darker and darker, all the Twinkles began to appear, blinking, fragile, in silvers, gold, green, pink and blue. Seraphine tried to see her own twinkles up there, and for a fleeting moment was sure she had spotted them. But they were quickly absorbed by a passing cloud. "Thank you," Seraphine whispered, and blew them a kiss.